Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up.
James has been consistent in looking to amplify the Pacific voice and the impact of climate change.
New Zealand's Green Party co-leader James Shaw is stepping down. We look at the impact he's had on the Pacific region. Also,
this airport is the lifeline of our economy.
The Cook Islands International Airport in Rarotonga celebrates its 50th anniversary. And later on, we talanoa with Tongan chef Dovai Poloniati, who's leading an Auckland restaurant. The co-leader of the New Zealand Green Party, James Shaw, has announced he'll be stepping aside in March.
We are very much a new caucus now, moving into opposition again for the first time in 6 years, and I feel the time is right for a new co-leader to stand alongside Marama.
He served as New Zealand's Climate Change Minister for 6 years and as Green Party co-leader for almost 9. Pacific political commentator Thomas Wynn told Caleb Fotheringham James Shaw's legacy around climate change will be long-lasting in the region.
I think James has been consistent in looking to amplify the Pacific voice and the impact of climate change for Pacific peoples. And for him, it was a key priority. I think one of the significant pieces of work was when the government co-sponsored and led by James Vanuatu, when they went to the ICJ, and of course the ICJ is in everybody's sort of crosshairs at the moment, where they co-sponsored Vanuatu asking the question and clarification on other states' legal obligations in protecting the rights of places like the Pacific from climate change and the adverse effects of it. And what he did there was he really helped large ocean states have a voice against larger polluting countries and to get a UN legal opinion on it. I think of all the things that James has done, the mechanisms that he's utilised, that for me is one that's a real standout because he allowed Vanuatu to lead it and the government here at the time co-sponsored it. So that one sort of sticks out in my mind probably the most. And then, of course, at COP25 and the different COPs, James went as the climate change minister, and I know friends of mine and colleagues that were working at the Moana Blue Pacific space, always appreciated his support. And I think lastly, the Pacific countries especially wanted greater access to climate funding, climate adaptation funding. Many of these larger countries talk about green climate funding and the financing available, but often these countries do not have the skills to be able to access it and the cumbersome to do. And James was really good at helping Pacific countries get a hold of that financing so they could do what they needed to do in their own country and self-determine for themselves what they needed to do to combat something that actually, they hadn't precipitated. So I think that will go down for me. I think in the Pacific, James was a friend to the Pacific and he practiced what he preached. And I think that's something that will be a legacy of his for us in the Pacific.
Do you imagine Pacific leaders will be quite sad to see him go then?
Yeah, I can imagine there's a sense of uncertainty now, with James gone. There were, in the Pacific, everything is around relationship. And, James had a good relationship with the nations in the Pacific. And I think locally, our younger Pacific voter really leaned into the principles and the values of the Green Party. I know numbers of even my own children voted for the Greens, and there was something about their message that resonated with that younger Pacific voter making their way through that maybe became disenfranchised or disillusioned with the other parties or the other main parties that Pacific people have generally, leaned into. So I can see as the future goes on, with James stepping out, the next person stepping in will be critical to really capture that Pacific voice and that Pacific vote in this next generation coming through this next election cycle.
Do you think James Shaw will be, we've spoken in, he's primarily, it seems, known for sort of that climate change space. Do you think he'll be remembered for other things that he potentially did for Pacific peoples outside of that?
No, I don't. I think actually this will be the area And it really was unashamedly his focus. Marama had, the DV, domestic violence, family violence space, and other, parts of the Green Caucus had other remits. But James was very clear about what he stood for, what he championed, and if one is realistic, one can do one job really, really well, and Parliament can put you across a whole range of work. And sometimes you don't do it all well because your focus is somewhere else. But James was very clear about what he wanted to do and what his focus was. I think his legacy around climate change will be long lasting.
Who do you think is going to be the next leader?
Look, selfishly, if I could say, look, I really think, and I am biased, I'm 100% biased, I just needed to admit my bias, but my cousin, Tiano Tuiono, I think would be an amazing leader for the Greens. He's Pacific and Māori, and, he has courage. He's spoken his truth in Parliament and outside. He leads from the back, and he just serves. So my pick, and I declare my bias, would definitely be Tiano. I think he would be an amazing co-leader to the Green Party and to partner with, the amazing work that Marama does.
And I imagine if he is picked, he can fill some of that Pacific gap that James Shaw could potentially leave behind with that climate space stuff that he's been so focused on.
Yeah, look, I think it would send a very, very strong signal to the Pacific that the Green Party see the value in Pacific people within their, not just within their party, but within their leadership. And, to have someone potentially like Tiano, in the Pacific championing on behalf of the Pacific climate change crisis would just be something I know the Pacific people would really, really just support. But ultimately, that decision with the Greens will be left to their members, and they'll make the right decision.
A political sociologist says Fiji's Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka likely dismissed Education Minister Aseri Ranjojo to avoid looking weak. Despite requesting to be reinstated as a cabinet minister, Aseri Ranjojo's pleas have so far fallen on deaf ears. Alicia Foon spoke to political sociologist Stephen Ratuva about Rabuka's attempts to put out fires within his coalition government.
Rabuka's been trying his best to hold a coalition together, but with some challenges. So issues of discipline, so you have issues of differences in relation to where things are going and how things to be done. And there are also, of course, the scandals, which has been rocking the government, the sex politics scandal, insubordination scandal, and so forth. So Rabuka has been seen as a weak leader. And as a military officer, that probably doesn't sit well. So he's trying to do something to assert himself. The same way that his reputation as a coup-maker, as a tough soldier. So it's probably where the political psychology of his decision comes from, and not to respond positively to Sodelpa's appeal to change his mind. So there's been some attempt at reconciliation. Things still has to unfold as to how that will end up. Although Rabuka initially is saying that he's not interested in bowing down to any attempt to reinstate Ranjojo. So it's a stalemate of some kind. Potentially can be destabilizing in the long run.
You brought up the sex and drug scandal. This has been dominating headlines for the past at least 2 weeks. Do you believe that it's a coincidence, or that something is being unofficially addressed through this dismissal, and now we're seeing a complaint against Linda Taboya? So that complaint is currently being assessed by the People's Alliance watchdog, and the fact that Aseri has been dismissed and now Linda could be. Do you believe there's a link here to that scandal?
Well, it's very easy to make links. It's very easy to draw up conspiracy theories, I suppose. It's very, particularly when the same people are involved. And although the situations under scrutiny are probably different from each other, but because they're linked in terms of personalities, so people make conclusion maybe they're linked. Certainly, the way in which the drag and sex scandal had played out. It's embarrassed the government. It has weakened its moral force, particularly in a Christian country, and particularly when Rambuka and the leaders of SODELPA and a few other politicians are actually evangelical Christians. So there are these levels of contradictions, and of course those connections will be made and are being made by people. People are calling for both Rondondo and Linda Tambue to go. And, in the social media, in private, politicians are talking about it. And a lot of people in this country are also talking about it because it's being suggested is all these scandals are distraction from what the role of the government should be doing to address issues of development, to address issues of opportunities, of education, of health, and all the energy is focused on the crisis which is at hand.
Do you believe there is some truth to these scandals and what's been happening, despite Linda Tambue telling us that it's fake news, and then former Minister Rondondo and denying the allegations?
Well, the general feeling amongst people is that there's some degree of truth in it, and there have been backstories as well to those who know about the two in government and so forth. A lot of evidence there, but naturally the two will defend their position because it's going to be very costly for them politically in terms of reputation, in terms of the moral high ground which they thought they would be occupying as leaders of the community. And so they have to defend themselves. It's their right to defend themselves. And if investigations show that, in the case of Linda, for instance, if it's true, then there's some disciplinary processes, I suppose, which the party has to go through. It's been part of the discussion, certainly, in the last month or so, and it dominates the narrative. Certainly, politicians, they're public figures, and they're paid by taxpayers. There has to be accountability. They are role models, not only political role models, they are moral role models, they're cultural role models. They are looked up to, so it's important that there are processes in place. There are codes of conduct for parliamentarians. It's important to abide by those. I think it's very important that the leaders should be seen to be law-abiding and make sure that their behaviour is exemplary.
We have also been told, affairs between ministers and what they do in private is no one's business. That should not be the focus. Considering the Christian morals and the grounds and foundation that this government speaks on and acts on, do you believe there is that kind of moral discussion surrounding what is expected of politicians and parliamentarians when it comes to behaving at a standard that is essentially moral and biblical?
It's multi-layered. This kind of scandals, you have to see it from different perspectives. Yes, it is true that what happens in private behind the scenes should be left there. But yes, for private citizens, that's true. But as in another country in the world, whether it's the United States, Trump is going through that in the court, whether it's in Britain, in Australia, those public sex scandals by politicians actually can be career-ending because it's of public interest, because it represents a very significant behavioral issue for politicians. So politicians should be setting the tone in terms of how they behave. And if in public they do things which may not be right in the eyes of the community, then there will be responses. And certainly in a country where Christianity is dominant, particularly amongst the indigenous Fijians, and there's a growing influence of evangelical Christians. So some of those issues which have moral implications become part of the bigger, not only religious, not only cultural, but certainly political issue. But there have been scandals within the churches themselves, sex scandals, and a few ministers have ended up in jail for that. So it's something which is quite common, not just in Fiji, but elsewhere, especially at this point in time. It's very important for politicians to understand that people on the ground, people in the community, still have moral view of the world, which has to be respected as well.
The Cook Islands celebrated the historic 50th anniversary of the Rarotonga International Airport this morning. Thousands of community members turned up to attend the grand festivities held on the airport tarmac. Tiana Haxton has the story.
Half a century ago, the New Zealand government funded the development of an international airport in the Cook Islands. After 3 years of construction, the runway was officially opened by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the 29th of January 1974. In a grand anniversary celebration this morning, the Cook Islands Prime Minister, the Honourable Mark Brown, reflected on how the airport benefited the country.
The construction of our new airport began in 1970. Half a century later, this airport is the lifeline of our economy. An economy that saw our country graduate in 2020 to the OECD standard for a developed nation.
The Prime Minister said the airport was born out of the dreams of the country's first Premier, the late Albert Henry. Henry had a vision that an international airport would strengthen the country's economy.
Our first Premier, Albert Henry, could see back then that this airport would open new doors of opportunity for the Cook Islands. It was, as Papa Arapati called it, a stepping stone in our journey to economic self-sufficiency.
Mr. Brown said the opening of the airport in 1974 ushered in a new era of prosperity and development for the island nation. The chairman of the airport's board of directors agrees. Mr. Taoro Brown said the airport is one of the country's biggest assets. He is confident it will continue to support the Cook Islands' development in the years to come.
As we look towards the next 50 years, we do with confidence knowing that we are guided by the past experience and the proven resilience, exceptional leadership, and of course our faith.
The Rarotonga International Airport has seen over 3 million passengers arrive in the country over the past 50 years. This is a steep difference compared to the 5,000 people that came through the airport in its first year of operation in 1974. Prime Minister Brown said no one then could have predicted the visitor numbers of today.
Since our airport opened 50 years ago, we have welcomed 3.2 million passengers into our country, peaking at more than 170,000 in 2019.
Such a grand achievement was well worth the week-long celebrations that concluded in Rarotonga this morning. A commemorative plaque was unveiled, followed by the cutting of an anniversary cake. The day ended with cultural dance performances by schools and community groups.
A Tongan culinary artist has recently been appointed as the executive chef at Auckland's Sky City restaurant, The Grill. Dolvai Boloniati's journey has come full circle, as it was at Sky City where he completed his chef apprenticeship as a teenager. From there, he gained international experience, sharpening his craft in renowned restaurants spanning Hong Kong, Australia and Canada. And Dolvai joins me on Pacific Waves. Malolele Dolvai, what was your reaction when you learnt about your new role?
Well, it wasn't a surprise, to be honest. It was like a transition thing. Like, I knew that this spot was gonna come up very soon, and my boss pretty much said, he pretty much trained me up to, as soon as the opportunity came, I'll just slide right in.
Food is such a big part of our Pacific culture. Did that play a big part in your culinary career? I mean, talk to me about your journey.
Me getting into this industry started in high school, South Auckland, Southern Cross campus. I was at an age, I think I was like 13, and we were getting asked those questions at that time, like, what do you want to do when you grow up and leave school and stuff. Didn't really have an answer. But I noticed whenever we go to assemblies, there's this, our cooking class will always be winning like cooking competitions and stuff. That kind of like triggered an interest. And one day I was just like, went and talked to that teacher that ran that program, and yeah, she kind of took me on board very young. And she kind of entered me into competitions at a very young age, took me overseas and kind of like opened my eyes to this path. And came back from that first trip and never looked back.
And now you're the executive chef. I mean, how would you describe the Grill restaurant? What's on offer?
The Grill restaurant is a New Zealand steak and seafood restaurant. Our main focus is showing the world New Zealand's best when it comes to seafood, like just everything. We're still early ages, like of finding these small farms and these cool stories and all of that.
Right, and you've also built up an impressive portfolio given your international experience. So why did you return to New Zealand?
Why did I come back to New Zealand?
Yeah.
COVID. Yeah. The truth is, my wife and I left New Zealand to go and do some travel and just kind of like experience countries that I haven't been to yet. We did like a 2-month trip around Southeast Asia and Europe, and then we made our way to Canada where we stayed for 2 years. Then COVID happened, and then the plan from there was meant to go to Korea for another 2 years, but COVID happened, so we had no other choice but to come back to New Zealand. And yeah, that's the reason why I'm back.
Well, I guess you can say that COVID was a bit of a blessing in disguise then, right? I mean, now you're
yeah, you could say that. Yeah,
awesome role.
Definitely.
From your perspective, would you say that there's an underlying perception that Pacific food is only taken seriously when it's on offer at a cuisine style restaurant? I mean, I don't necessarily see an influx of balangis at the markets, but then you don't see a great number of Pacific people at these restaurants. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is a hard one, eh? I don't think our Polynesian cuisine has been established enough. I'm kind of like putting everybody in the same boat, because I feel like Samoan and Niuean and Tongan, they all do different type of food, although it's similar, but like there is a difference. But I just don't think that we are, like, our food has a reputation yet. Yeah, we're not quite there yet. We haven't built a reputation, and I feel like chefs like Michael with the new Matita restaurant is like definitely a stepping stone, and like I'm really proud that he works across the road, and I get to see him every now and then, because I used to follow him from a very young age. Like when I started my career, he was definitely someone that I looked up to, and yeah, his with Matita is definitely a stepping stone to getting the cuisine or the food noticed.
Do you think you'll introduce Pacifica food into the restaurant menu?
Oh, definitely. Well, maybe not like authentic dishes, but definitely the feeling of when I eat my favorite foods like Little Sepia, and try to recreate that feeling with different ingredients. If that makes any sense.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnzi.com/programs. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio podcasts. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, to Whāsui Fua.